Hello and welcome to an exclusive hour-long special with me, Alex Belfield, talking to one of my favourite people. Paul Merton, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much indeed. I'm very well indeed.
It's nice to see you because you're always funny and I like that about you.
Oh, that's good. That's put the pressure on for this interview then, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting. You're funny, but you don't like to laugh. Well, not very often anyway.
I suppose, yes, when I'm doing a television thing, I do I do laugh a lot in normal life. But there is something to be said for if you keep a sort of straight face when you're saying something funny, you get an extra laugh because you look as if you don't get the joke yourself. So that just adds to the laughter, really. It's as cynical as that.
I'll tell you what's great about you. You seem to be so quick and quicker than everybody else. Nobody ever seems to get one over you, which is such a skill. How did you develop that?
I don't know. I suppose being at school, I was sort of one of those kids who, when I was about 8 or 9, I knew every joke going in the Beano, but then when I got into my teens, I started I suppose what we call ad-libbing or improvise and just making stuff up with people, and I've been doing that all my life really. So it's a honed skill, if it is a skill, and that's where it comes from. One
of the things I love to do is coming down and see one of your shows at the Comedy Store when you've just got those nights where anything can happen.
The Comedy Store Players, every Sunday and Wednesday. Yeah.
Why do you bother putting yourself through that? I mean, wouldn't it be easier just to get an act, do 10 minutes and clear off instead of having the danger of being booed off if you're not funny?
Oh, well, you've always got the danger of being booed off just doing the stand-up, but the reason why I do the Comedy Store Players show every week is because it's a social thing. There's 6 of us do the show. It's always completely different. I was a stand-up many years ago, but I did find it a little bit it is a little bit lonely. And it can be, and I wasn't one of those people that enjoyed listening to myself on stage for 2 hours. I mean, some people love it and it's written into their DNA, but I'm not one of them really. I prefer in sharing the gig with people and then sort of sharing the after gig stuff with people as well. So with stand-up, it's not always that easy.
I always think it's interesting. I talk to a lot of comedians because I'm so passionate about comedy. I'm more of a gag man myself. I like a punchline. And we'll talk about that in a minute regarding the new book of silent comedy. When you put yourself in that arena, something like Jongleurs or the Comedy Store, you've got to be insane to want to do that because they can turn on you, and they do. And that presumably is the worst feeling in the world.
Yes, it is. It's pretty bad because you've set yourself up as somebody that's trying to be funny and the audience aren't enjoying it. I hopefully now I don't often play to many drunks. That's the problem, you see. We go to a late night club, Saturday night, Friday night sort of thing, midnight show or whatever. Then people are going to be a little bit the worse for wear, and trying to sort of deal with a drunk heckler is not easy because they're so drunk they don't even understand that you're putting them down. So
it could be funny to a point, but it can also be distracting for the audience. And I've also seen that happen where the audience turn on the audience, and that's even worse than them turning on the comic.
Yes, exactly. yes, exactly. I did a gig about 20 years ago at a club in Brixton, and there was 2 guys in the front that were sort of just heckling every act, and every act had a really hard time. So I did was I took the audience out of the pub, out into the car park where there was a light, and there was about sort of 40 people who gathered around me, and I did my act out there. So I couldn't get rid of the heckler, so I moved the venue.
I suppose that's one way out of it, isn't it?
Exactly.
We're going to talk about your life and career. We're going to talk about the new book on silent comedy as well, and the TV series that went with it. I'm so fascinated by you because you're a very private man, and I don't blame you. You let your work speak for itself.
Yes.
Are you happy on the other side of the desk, or would you rather be sat in a TV studio where you're just being funny?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question, really. What are you
Well, a lot of comedians don't like being funny when you ask them to ad-lib.
Oh, right,
or
yes.
A lot of comedians don't like talking about themselves because they're a character. I remember my disappointment the first time I interviewed Julian Clary. He seemed so sad and so unfunny. The second time I interviewed him, he was slightly better, but there's something kind of tragic about comedians. You seem to be laughing a lot. That's a relief.
I don't know. There is it's a bit of a myth that, Julian just might have been having a headache or something, might have been having a bad day. But I think it's a bit of a myth that comedians are necessarily depressive sort of people. You get certain types of people who are, who would be depressive plumbers if they were plumbers. It seems it's an interesting sort of idea because the notion that the funny person is actually crying inside appeals to our sort of sense of opposites. But most comedians I know are actually sort of no more bonkers than anybody else.
I think it's harder for the newer comedians to do interviews like this. If you interview somebody like Ken Dodd, he can go, ha ha, ha ha, and suddenly he's into the act, and it's the act, and you get that for the interview.
Yeah.
I mean, you are you, really. I don't see you as an act, because
that's good.
you come across as a real person, which is different, isn't it, from the old style?
I suppose so, yes. I mean, you had to be a sort of like, Ken Dodd, wonderful comic, larger than life, and when he started off in the 50s in the musical, playing big sort of theatres that weren't very full of people, you had to be sort of quite large and to get your comedy across, I think. I can still remember with great affection jokes that he did on the radio about sort of 40 years ago that made me laugh. A man walks into a shop and somebody says to him, "You're a bit toffee-nosed, aren't you?" He says, "I can't help it. It's toffee on the end of my nose." I remember that when I was about 11 when I heard that. And so it's funny how sort of jokes, sometimes jokes just stick with you.
He was the first comedian I ever saw that made me want to be interested in comedy. I found him so curious, and I still to this day, whenever I meet him or go and see his show, I'm fascinated by his ability. He's really of that old school that he loves it and lives for it, which is tremendous.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's he's a working comic. He wants to keep on working, and if you are a comedian, it does make sense to keep sort of working live. That's partly one of the reasons why I do the Comedy Store, just to keep sort of match fit for when you're doing television programmes.
I'll tell you what, he was 80 this year, so let's celebrate with a bit of Ken Dodd. We'll be back with Paul Merton next on your favourite local radio station.
The thrill as you stand in the wings, ready to go on, listening to the compere, cracking all your best jokes. I believe myself in love at first sight. Try it yourself. When you go down to bed tomorrow morning, take all your clothes off and have a look at yourself in a full-length mirror. No, it's nice to start the day off with a laugh. I was lying in the bath this morning and I was thinking to myself, by Jove, we've got a lot to be proud of in this country. How it is. You should have two of everything down the side and one of everything down the middle. A marvellous show for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. If you'll only be patient and gullible. What a beautiful day for squirting the nozzle of a vacuum cleaner up the leg of a weather forecaster's trousers. Saying, how's this for a ridge of high pressure?
Hi, folks. My name's Ken Dodd. Ken Dodd here from Notty Ash, and I'm listening to Alex Belfield. But I'll be better soon.
Celebrating 50 plus years in comedy and 80 years on the planet, the fabulous Ken Dodd here on your favourite local radio station. It's Alex Belfield back with Paul Merton for an exclusive hour-long programme. I want to talk about the newer comics now, like the Russell Brands, who are so popular right now. It seems to me, I don't know what you think about it, that their free-thinking form of comedy, where they just talk about what comes into their mind, it's not necessarily gags like Ken Dodd does. It seems to be of the time. I'm not sure whether it's going to be around in 25 years, let alone 50 years. What do you think about that?
Yes. Well, he seems to be sort of very, very on top of what he's doing, so I should think he probably would be around in 5 years' time. I don't know. I don't know how sort of... I mean, Russell's managed to do it in the last couple of years. How you go these days from being sort of like a fairly anonymous comic to being a well-known one, because there's just so many people doing it. Every year when I go to Edinburgh with the improv show that we do, you see a whole bunch of posters up on the wall in the venue. And they're completely new people I've never heard of. And last year, there was a whole bunch of completely new people that I hadn't heard of then either, and before that. So there's hundreds of people doing it. So how you ever sort of get spotted or stand out from the crowd, I don't know how you do it. I suppose... I have no idea, actually. I just don't know. I mean, when I started off doing I was very lucky when I started off doing stand-up comedy, because the only venue going was the Comedy Store. When that closed down from 18 months, and that's when all these other places like Jongleurs and the King's Head and Crouch End opened up as comedy clubs to serve that audience. Was no longer pardon me, was no longer going to the Comedy Store. So when I started, I was able to phone up Jongleurs and say, well, I've done the Comedy Store, then I could phone up somewhere else and say I've played Jongleurs. So it was very easy to get bookings, and there weren't many comics around. Often I would be on a bill with maybe a poet, a juggler, a mime artist, a guitarist, and I'd be the only comic on the bill. I mean, those days only lasted about 4 or 5 months, I think. But it was a very good time to be doing it. But now, I mean, somebody was telling me the other day, you have to some of the big venues, you go to do an open spot, and 6 months later, you come back and do another one, if you were any good 6 months beforehand. And so how you build a career doing that, I don't know.
It's also fascinating when you read people's autobiographies like Graham Norton, who admits that he doesn't write jokes, he's an actor, and he's given jokes. And Ricky Gervais, I think, is the same. He's not a stand-up comedian. He's never tried to be, although he's selling out arenas now being a stand-up.
Yes.
So is he acting being a stand-up then?
Well, I haven't seen his stuff, so I imagine so, yes. I mean, stand-up's one of those things. There's much more to it than appears obvious from the surface of it, It's not just a question of standing up and saying jokes. I don't know. If people have spent a lot of money to go and see Ricky, I imagine they've invested a lot of, they've invested the money and they've sort of invested some of their emotion into it. So they want it to be a good gig, so they want to have a good time. So, I don't know, if they see him doing stand-up and they're happy with that, then the world is a happier place.
It does seem to me, Paul, that if you're well known, it is easier to get the laughs, providing you've got some decent material, than if you're unknown, because they're kind of in on your act and your style and who you are, therefore will laugh quicker.
Yes, I think that's true to a certain extent, because when I used to go on the do the stand-up, you try and make an impression very early on. You try to first 10 seconds would have the best joke I had. And that sort of settles the audience down and think, okay, that was funny, so maybe this guy's going to be all right. Now I suppose I wouldn't have to do that if I was to do stand-up, but you've still got to deliver. You've still got to have the gags, I suppose. But yeah, it's got to be a lot easier once people have come specifically to see you.
Presumably those first 10 seconds are very important if you're doing something like Jongleurs or the Comedy Store.
Yeah, exactly. I used to go out, my first gag used to be I used to start off by saying I'm a topical comedian. During the Blitz in the Second World War, my dad used to say, don't worry about the bombs. The only bomb you've got to worry about is the one that's got your name written on it. That scared the next door neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Doodlebug. So that was my first joke. That usually went over quite well, because Doodlebug's such an unexpected word to hear in a punchline.